Hello, and welcome to another episode of Facts Matter, where we look at what they said versus what the data shows. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, was one of the biggest stories of 2025. It promised to revolutionize how the federal government spends your money. Elon Musk, the world's richest person, took the reins and said he'd cut at least $2 trillion from the federal budget. Now it's 2026. DOGE is officially disbanded. So, did it work? Today we're going to look at the actual Treasury data, the actual Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, and the actual spending figures. Not the claims, not the political spin from either side. What does the data actually show? The answer might surprise you, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. Let's start with what was promised. The goal kept shrinking throughout 2025. October 2024, on the campaign trail, Musk told a Trump rally he could cut at least $2 trillion from the federal government. That's roughly 30% of all federal spending. It's more than the entire discretionary budget. By February 2025, at the first cabinet meeting, Musk was already more cautious, saying $1 trillion, or about 15% of the budget, could be cut by the end of the fiscal year. By April, the goal had dropped dramatically. At another cabinet meeting, Musk told Trump the team expected to save $150 billion by the fiscal year. That's a 93% reduction from the original promise. And when it was all said and done, DOGE's own website claimed $240 billion in total savings by the time it shut down. But even that number, as we'll see, doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The goal went from $2 trillion to around $200 billion claimed. That's an 89% reduction from the original promise. And we haven't even started fact checking the $214 billion yet. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at what the U.S. Treasury's own numbers say. Total federal outlays for fiscal year 2025 were $7.01 trillion. That's up $275 billion, or 4.1% from the previous year. Spending didn't go down, it went up. The federal deficit was $1.8 trillion. That's the sixth largest deficit in American history. And the national debt, it hit $38.6 trillion as of early February 2026. That's up $2.35 trillion from a year ago. The debt is growing at $6.4 billion per day. And here's a key quote. This isn't from a liberal think tank. This is from the Cato Institute, one of the most prominent libertarian organizations in the country. They wrote, there is no visible structural break in 2025 spending that coincides with DOGE's start date. An observer who did not know when DOGE started could not identify it. In other words, if you looked at a chart of federal spending, you couldn't even tell when DOGE began its work. The spending line just kept going up. So why didn't spending go down? Because of where the money actually of because of where the money actually goes. Look at this breakdown. Social Security alone was $1.58 trillion, and it went up $120 billion. Health spending that's Medicare and Medicaid, was $979 billion, up $67 billion. Net interest on the national debt was $970 billion, up $89 billion. For the first time in American history, interest payments exceeded $1 trillion during the fiscal year 2025. Defense was $917 billion, up $43 billion. Now, add up just those top three, Social Security, health, and interest, that's over half of all federal spending, and DOGE couldn't touch any of it. Social Security and Medicare are set by law. You need Congress to change them. Interest on the debt, that's just math. You owe it, you pay it. The only category that went down significantly was education, which dropped $234 billion, but that was mostly an accounting adjustment related to student loan modifications, not actual program cuts. This is the fundamental math problem DOGE faced. You could fire every federal employee, cancel every contract, and you still wouldn't get close to $2 trillion. The money goes to checks that get mailed to seniors, to hospitals, and to bondholders. Those are the conversations nobody wants to have. DOGE published what they called a wall of receipts, a public list of contracts they said they'd canceled. It was supposed to prove the savings were real, but when journalists and analysts actually checked the math, it fell apart. Here are some of the biggest discrepancies. The very first version of the wall of receipts claimed $8 billion saved from canceling a single ICE contract. It was a typo. The contract was worth $8 million and only $4.5 million in actual savings. They overstated that one item by 1,778 times. The single largest item on the wall of receipts, a $1.9 billion Treasury contract with Sentinel Technologies, was actually canceled during the Biden administration. DOGE took credit for a cut they didn't make. 3 U.S. ID contracts worth $655 million. Each were listed separately, but they were the same contract counted 3 times. The SBA, Small Business Association administrator, told Congress they saved $3 billion. When Fed Scoop checked the DOGE receipts, $22 million. That's off by a factor of 136. And this isn't partisan analysis. NPR matched the claims against federal procurement databases. Bank of America Securities, a Wall Street firm, said the numbers were overstated. The conservative American Enterprise Institute said the real savings were closer to $10 billion, and 34% of the contracts DOGE listed showed $0 in savings. The money had already been spent. Now, here's what makes this a facts matter story. This isn't a left versus right debate. Organizations across the entire political spectrum looked at DOGE's claim and came to the same basic conclusion. On the conservative side, the Cato Institute, libertarian, pro-small government, said spending went up $248 billion and there was no visible structural break. The American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank, said real savings were closer to $10 billion, not the hundreds of billions claimed. The Manhattan Institute estimated workforce cuts saved about $40 billion per year. Meaningful, but a tiny fraction of claims. Nonpartisan sources. The Congressional Budget Office confirmed outlays were up 4%. NPR matched DOGE's wall of receipts against actual federal procurement databases and found only about 2 to 2.3 billion in verified savings. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget confirmed spending was up 142 billion in just the first half of 2025. And from the private sector, Bank of America Securities called the contract savings overstated. The Wall Street Journal called the tallies flawed. The Brookings Institution's real-time spending tracker showed spending up about 6% by December. When the Cato Institute, NPR, and Bank of America all agree, that's about as close to consensus as you'll ever get in Washington. Now, to be fair, DOGE did accomplish something historically significant, just not what it promised. 317,000 federal employees departed the government in 2025. That is, according to the Cato Institute, the largest peacetime workforce reduction on record, a decline that large hasn't happened since the military demobilizations at the end of World War II and the Korean War. But here's the breakdown that matters. Of those 317,000 departures, about 143,000 came through the deferred resignation offer, most of those in October alone. When the bulk offer kicked in, another 129,000, or 41%, was normal, routine attrition. People retire, people quit, people move on. That happens every year. Only about 24,000 were involuntary actual layoffs through the RIF process, and 21,000 took early retirement or buyout packages. So yes, the workforce shrank by 9% in 10 months. That is historically fast. Federal employment fell back to late 2014 levels. It accomplished in roughly 1 year what the Clinton administration's reinvented government effect took 4 years to do. But here's the critical question. Did cutting those jobs actually save money? That's next. Here's a fundamental math problem, and it's one that both supporters and critics of DOGE should understand. Federal employee payroll, the salaries of everyone who works for the government, is only about 8% of total federal spending. The other 92%, that's Social Security checks, Medicare reimbursements, interest on the debt, contracts with private companies, and grants. So even if you fired every federal employee, every single one, you'd only eliminate 8% of spending. Obviously, you can't do that because someone has to run the IRS, the military, air traffic control, the courts. The Cato Institute estimated that a 10% reduction in the federal workforce, which is roughly what DOGE achieved, saves about $40 billion a year. That's real money. But it's 0.6% of total federal spending. It's a rounding error compared to 2 trillion. And there's another problem. When you cut federal workers, someone still has to do the work. Reports are already showing that some agencies are hiring private contractors to fill the gaps. And contractors often cost more than federal employees for the same work. This is why the spending numbers didn't move. You can cut the workforce dramatically and barely touch the budget. The money isn't in paychecks, it's in transfer payments. Now, here's the part that might be the most important slide in this entire video, because the question isn't just did DOGE save money, it's did DOGE cost money. First, IRS review. DOGE cut over 11,000 IRS employees. The agency dropped investigations of wealthy taxpayers and corporations. The unit responsible for auditing billionaires lost about 40% of its staff. Treasury Department and IRS officials told the Washington Post they predicted at least a 10% drop in tax receipts. That's over $500 billion in revenue the government may not collect. Because when people see the IRS is understaffed, some of them stop paying. For context, every dollar the IRS spends returns between $5 and $12 in collected taxes. The Government Accountability Office found every additional hour spent auditing wealthy taxpayers saved the government $13,000. Cutting the IRS workforce doesn't save money, it loses money. Second, the Partnership for Public Service estimated $135 billion in transition costs across the government. Productivity losses, paid leave, severance packages, hiring contractors to replace fired workers, and legal fees. Third, the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations estimated DOGE actually generated $21.7 billion in waste from botched situations, system crashes at the Social Security Administration, rehiring previously fired workers and duplicated work. Add those up, and you get a very uncomfortable number. Let's put it all together in one scorecard. On the savings side, DOGE's own claim was $214 billion. But when NPR matched those claims against actual federal procurement data, verified savings were about $2 to $2.3 billion. The conservative American Enterprise Institute said closer to $10 billion. Cato estimates the workforce cuts could save about $40 billion per year if they're sustained and not backfilled with contractors. On the cost side, the IRS revenue loss alone could exceed $500 billion. The transition and productivity costs estimated at $135 billion. The Senate found DOGE generated $21.7 billion in waste, and there are hundreds of lawsuits still working through the courts. Those costs haven't been tallied yet. So what's the bottom line? In the best case scenario, giving DOGE every benefit of the doubt, it saved tens of billions of dollars. That's meaningful, but it's not even close to $2 trillion or $1 trillion or even $214 billion. In the worst case, when you factor in the IRS revenue losses, the transition costs, and the waste generated, DOGE may have actually cost the federal government hundreds of billions more than it saved. And remember, even Musk himself, in a December interview, called DOGE only somewhat successful and said he wouldn't do it again. Here's a slide that no politician from either party wants you to see. Because the DOGE story isn't really about Elon Musk or efficiency. It's about a fundamental structural problem that no amount of contract counseling can fix. Truth number one, entitlements are on autopilot. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid together cost $3.5 trillion a year. They grow automatically every year because of aging demographics and inflation adjustments. Only Congress has the power to change them, and no one in Congress, Republican or Democrat, is willing to propose cuts to Social Security or Medicare because it's politically suicide. Truth number two, interest on the national debt hit $1 trillion in fiscal year 2025 for the first time ever. The debt is growing at $2.35 trillion per year. That interest payment is now the fastest growing line item in the entire federal budget. And the more the debt grows, the more interest we pay, which increases the deficit, which increases the debt. It's a doom loop. Truth number three, even if you could eliminate every dollar of waste, fraud, and abuse, the GAO's upper estimate is $521 billion. The deficit would still be over $1 trillion. DOGE created what the Manhattan Institute Jessica Rendell called a false perception that the entire budget deficit can be eliminated by going after waste, fraud, and abuse. The real problem requires hard choices that both parties are avoiding. Here's the bottom line, and I want to be really clear about this because the data doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. We didn't save money, we lost money. In the best case scenario, giving DOGE every benefit of the doubt, using the Cato Institute's own estimates, workforce cuts save about $40 billion a year. That's meaningful. That's real. Nobody should dismiss that. But against that, the estimated costs are staggering. The IRS revenue loss alone, over $500 billion projected, dwarfs every dollar DOGE saved. Add $135 billion in transition and productivity costs. Add $21.7 billion in waste the Senate found DOGE itself created. You're looking at over $656 billion in costs. That's a net loss of over $600 billion. An initiative designed to save money may have been one of the most expensive government experiences in modern American history. And you don't have to take my word for it. Elon Musk himself, in a December 2025 interview, called DOGE only somewhat successful and said he wouldn't do it again. He said he wished he just worked on his companies instead. When the person who ran the initiative says he wouldn't do it again, that tells you everything you need to know about the bottom line.